Hey skiers, I'm Jeff from skiessentials.com.
I'm Bob. How's it going?
Bob and I are here today to talk about the new K2 Cortex 140 here. And we also have a special guest joining us remotely. We've got Tom from K2. Tom, thanks for joining us. Can you do us a favor and introduce yourself? Tell us what your title is and what your role is.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Tom Pietrowski. I'm the global product line manager for K2 ski boots.
Sweet.
All right.
So safe to say you're an expert on this boot.
I should be at this point, yes.
Excellent. And you know, this is exciting for various reasons. The boot itself is really exciting. But I mean, kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but this is over the past few years of all the K2 boots that I've tried, this one definitely works the best for me. So I'm very excited about it just from a product standpoint. And then obviously the double BOA is a pretty big conversation in the industry right now. We were just talking about it before we started filming. Like, you and I often find ourselves engaged in like the same conversations online, even though you and I have actually never met each other before this moment. So it is a big topic, and I'm excited to ask you some questions and see where this conversation takes us. So just, you know, right off the bat, tell us a little bit about this boot. Like, when did the project start? What's the intention of the boot itself? You know, what are the goals? Where is it supposed to kind of fall in the industry?
Yeah, I think you touched on it actually straight away there. There's kind of two sides of it. Yeah, it's a dual BOA boot and it's our first dual BOA boot, but it's also a kind of a first stage, a evolution forward for K2 ski boots as well. We're kind of in our third round. We're still a very new boot brand. Started off obviously original spines, pinnacles. They worked well, but then it wasn't until really we had the Recon and Anthem back in 18 that we kind of took another step forward. That was at the time when ski boots were going very lightweight. You had things like the new Atomic Hawks. They were super lightweight. The Recon kind of followed up there, and they did well for us. Now, though, the industry, I feel, has taken another step forward, and we're getting back to the stage where people are really wanting more performance from a ski boot again. We've kind of understood the limitations of a lightweight product. For a lot of people, it's awesome. But as you get to the kind of the higher echelons of what people are doing in ski boots, heavier boots that are a little bit damper, they make a lot of sense. As K2 as a brand, our goal is to be number one in freeride. That's more so on the ski side. But to do that, we really wanted to have a strong freeride world tour presence. In the Freeride World Tour, the athletes need a specific product. We didn't offer that product. A Mindbender boot, a Recon boot, they're great, but they're really not going to take on what was needed for the Freeride World Tour. Cortex was kind of built out of that, basically. We needed that high-performance boot to take on basically what every other brand has, a race boot. We don't have a race program, so we never have that race boot. So Cortex for us was filling that niche, basically. It was building the highest performance boot we could, but in a freeride K2 manner. It just so happened to be a dual BOA boot because testing kind of formulated the BOA was going to work the best for it, and it worked out timeline-wise as well.
So, I mean, unbelievable segue into my next question here. You mentioned you kind of like, you fell into the use of dual BOA here, you know, mostly because the upper cuff BOA is kind of the newest to the market or the newest to consumers in general. Why upper cuff BOA? And you know, I've been skiing in them, not necessarily in K2, but I've been skiing in a double BOA boot for most of the season. So I have my own thoughts, but I didn't test them. I'm not an engineer. So I'm kind of interested to hear from you more from a technical perspective, like what's the deal?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it came down to we tested it and we tested what felt best. So with Cortex, like BOA, there is a number of considerations around it. We do know it's going to be slightly more expensive than buckles. So when we're originally kind of formatting this boot, we have a a kind of a standard product line we're going to try and meet. And we knew for that we were going to also offer a buckle cuff. We need that for a certain price point. But that kind of worked out nicely because we could go into testing having both a buckle cuff and a BOA cuff on the same boot. So we could directly test them back to back. We had a number of our athletes like Max Hitzig, one of our top freeride guys. He was there from the very beginning of this project. And we back-to-back tested a buckle cuff and a BOA cuff. Now, they both work well. Buckles still work on the cuff. That's why we're still using them in the model line. But we thought BOA, through testing them, it does offer something different than buckles. Whether you're going to say it's better is a hard one, really. I think it's different. And I think this is the big thing with ski boots is that options are always going to be best for the industry. You can never talk with absolute with ski boots. One boot will never work for everybody. So we like to try and build as many options as possible. And I think BOA Cuff does that. It does offer a different wrap than buckles. It also offers a different performance as well in the way that it's a single cable, so it will act differently than two static buckles. When you tighten a buckle up, there's no stretching in that at all. There's no stretching in the cable, but because the cable's in one system, it can move a little bit through the cuff. So it does just offer something different than buckles. And we found in our back-to-back testing that all of our testers found that the buckle cuff was offering both better comfort, but for the most part, a kind of a better performance as well. Like I said, buckle still the BOA, sorry. BOA, sorry. It was just offering something that the buckle cuff couldn't. And we took from that it was going to work for the highest level boot. That's why we kind of move forward with it on the top end models. And then as we get down to the more price point, the softer flexing ones, that's where we're going to utilize the buckle cuff.
Yeah. Now, so that's like basically everything that you said, like exactly echoes the things that I've been feeling. Like for me, they are, and Bob, we skied in these boots this morning, and I felt the exact same way in these boots that I have in other double BOA boots. It's both a comfort thing and a performance thing. And it is, I'm glad that you brought up like the subjective nature of ski boots in general, because for whatever reason, like, although I think you understand the technology, Bob, we've found that like I fully benefit from it. It is just hands down a better product. And for whatever reason, you don't exactly feel the same.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think that if this came in a 4-buckle, that I would choose this.
Yeah.
I would probably choose the 4-buckle.
Yeah, but that's pretty much exactly what Tom is kind of alluding to, is that it's never going to work for everybody. But I think like it's really cool hearing from people like yourself you've worked with so many different people that have had this on their foot, and the majority, or at least like, I mean, to me it sounds like the majority, but a significant portion of people prefer this from a comfort and performance perspective, to the point that, we're going to see it more and more.
Yeah, and I'm not going to tell Max Hitzig that he's wrong.
Right. Nor should you.
No.
I mean, feel free to, but yeah.
Good luck. I just wanted to talk a tiny bit more about this cable system and how it kind of adapts and like manipulates itself. So is it like, I don't know the best way to communicate it, but the way that I think about it is that as you're tightening this down, when your leg is in the boot, it is basically tightening to the point of least resistance first. Does that make sense?
Completely, yeah. It's why it will work for a lot of different shapes. Like you could have like a very exaggerated calf that will give you more of that cone shape. Some people have got a very straight calf. It's going to be cylindrical in that nature. But because of the way it works, because it is that single cable, if the top is bigger, then the top will pull to that certain point, but then the bottom will continue to pull inwards to give you that shaping. That is also why we made the decision early on our boot to go to a single cuff piece on it. So you'll notice, compared to even our buckle cuff in the same Cortex boot, these use a solid front piece. The buckle version still uses individual ones. And what we found during testing is, because of the way the BOA cuff works, i.e., it will pull to the least resistance. If you separate them, it exaggerates that. And we were actually finding we were getting a less consistent wrapping by having them separated. We found if you go to a single piece, then it actually kind of works with the BOA system better to help kind of push this further. And other boots are doing similar things. I know there's a boot you've been skiing more regularly that has a connection between the two as well. A little bit less exaggerated than ours. But we are a strong believer in that you're not just replacing buckles. We're using BOA as a different system. So there's no reason we have to build the boot in the same manner. And really, you shouldn't think about it as that. We're thinking of how do you build a boot to best utilize the system we use. Doesn't have to be the same as anything we've ever done before. And that's why you'll see our boots might look a little bit different than both our buckle boots, but also some of the competitor boots out there as well.
No, and that's cool that, like, I think it's awesome kind of approaching it from a ground up perspective.
Well, that's the benefit of not having a race department.
That's
that they're open to all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah.
Which I've always, like the spine boot, when you first came out with that, like I was like, wow, this is a really different thing than just skiing a Lang that's based off of their race boot. So that it really opens you up to a lot of possibilities, which I think is really interesting.
Now, Bob, I know you brought some questions before we get to your more pointed, really heavy-hitting questions. Just kind of taking BOA out of the equation, what else is going on in this boot? What other kind of key technologies do we have?
Yeah, and this is the big thing, really. Like we could talk for half an hour on this alone, but really like I said, we wanted to build what was performance-wise a race boot, basically. We needed that high-level boot. But to understand what was needed from that style of boot, we obviously skied all the kind of consumer level race boots out there. And we found basically that they ski extremely well. They're perhaps not the easiest to live with. A lot of them can be very cold, can be very hard to take on and off, don't offer the most comfort for the most part, like shock absorption, stuff like that. So we really wanted to go about this and, all right, we want the performance of a race boot, but we want the ease of use and kind of daily use of a traditional alpine boot. So more like, for example, a big one for us was the Atomic Redster CS. Awesome performance boot, kind of hard work to live with. Whereas something like a Atomic Hawks Ultra, very easy to live with, but doesn't offer the performance. We wanted to take those two extremes and build Cortex into the middle. So performance of a race boot, but ease of use. So things like the outsoles on the bottom. We didn't want to make a hard-soled boot that you need to then have it routed and put riser plates on. We put an outsole onto the bottom of it. The fast fit instep on the top of it is going to make the boots a lot easier to take on and off when they're cold. It's not going to be as easy as a thin-walled shell boot because the boot still has a thick wall, so it is still going to get cold. But the fast fit instep is going to make it a lot easier than a single material shell. And really putting the fast fit instep on does nothing in terms of performance. You alluded to it. We're not building a race boot. A race boot can't have a fast fit instep because the very best Alpine World Cup racers will tell you it slows that boot down for them. But for the other 99.9% of skiers, look, notice no difference whatsoever. So us not being stuck into racing meant we could make changes like this that are better for everybody else because we're not stuck building it for the tiny percent of World Cup racers. So yeah, basically a lot of the boot is just built around making it great for the everyday skier who wants the very best performance. And right now there really wasn't a product in the market that offered both.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking milliseconds when we're talking Freeride World Tour. So I think it fully makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Bob, you ready with some heavy hitting questions? I don't
know if Tom's ready, but I'm ready.
Tom seems like the type of guy that's ready.
Yeah.
We haven't stumped him yet, and I don't think you're going to.
I don't know. I got a pretty good one here, Jeff. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about the wrap of the upper cuff here, and this is unrelated. This is a bonus surprise question for Tom. Has there ever been any talk of changing the gearing of these pulleys, I guess? So like a bike gear, so that when you ratchet it, it's going to pull it's going to give more gearing to the lower one or the upper one. So you could change these wheels to offer different tightnessing.
Oh, interesting. Or location.
Or would that not work because it's a cable and it's smooth? I'm sure there's an engineering thing back there, but that's what my brain was going
question,
to.
though, and we completely did the same thing. So we actually originally tried upper cuff back in 2020. So when we first saw the lower, they had an upper as well at the same point. Originally, they were going to release both at the same time. That was pulled back, and I believe that was the right choice to do lower first because it's already a big change in ski boots. So doing two at once probably was a little too far. So we've been experimenting with upper cuff for, at this point, 5 years. So one of the first things we wanted to do is, because we thought the same thing, all right, if we move the position of, say, the top guide, is that going to change how it feels in relationship to where they are? If they're level, if we move one, does that change anything? No, is the answer. Because it's a single pull cable, it's always going to basically self-actualize. So regardless of where you put the guide, it isn't going to change anything. Now, interestingly, the question you asked about, could you change the rate? Again, because it's a single pull, you can't easily pull one of the cables faster than the other. And even if you could, again, it would self-actuate out. But maybe you could change the resistance on the guide. So maybe the bottom guide would pull less or pull more. Yes, is basically the answer. We are thinking about all these things. And I will say right now is I don't believe this upper system as it is today is what you'll see necessarily moving forward.
Right.
It's awesome on a high performance boot like this, but you get into boots like our BFC, a comfort boot, it is slow to do up. And it also isn't, the performance benefit isn't necessarily needed on a lower performance boot or a more comfort orientated boot. That needs a different system. So yeah, we're working with BOA to create different systems that are more appropriate to the boot that they're used on. So
Good question,
yes.
Bob.
That was a fun one.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the power plate on this 140. The 140 is the only one that has this power plate, which is this piece of plastic that Jeff is going to show you. I had to take mine off because I couldn't get my foot in. I have very rigid feet and ankles, so I literally couldn't get my foot in. I took the power plate off and it feels great, fits great. So Jeff has his power plate in. I took mine out, but Jeff also removed an energy bolt from the back.
Lower bolt.
So Jeff took off the lower bolt. I took off the energy plate. Whose boot is stiffer now?
I bet my guess is yours.
Yeah, you going with that final answer?
That would be my final answer. What's your final answer?
It's a great question. So first off, and it's super interesting you took the lower bolt out. That will do nothing.
Oh, really?
Yes. So the
right.
bolts in the back, you're connecting the cuff to the lower shell.
Yeah.
So if you take the lower bolt out, you've still got the upper connection. So nothing will change.
That's fascinating because I don't remember what boot it was, but I remember reading something about a boot that was like, if you take the upper bolt out, it'll soften it by this percentage. If you take the lower bolt out, it'll soften it by this percentage that was different than the other percentage. And you're just saying that's not true.
Completely. That's not true at all. Yeah.
This is fun.
Neither bolt will soften the flex. The flex of a boot is determined by both the compression of the cuff and the movement of the opening up, but more importantly, the bellowing of the lower shell. Bolts in the back do not change the shell. So the flex of the boot doesn't change. What changes is how much the cuff can move in relationship to the lower shell before it engages. So if you take the top screw out, you'll get a little bit more movement before basically the two interact with each other. So that's where people think it feels a little softer because you get initially a bit more movement. But eventually, as soon as you've gone through that initial movement, this flex is still identical. So that's why if you take the lower screw out, you'll actually change nothing because the cuff will still interact with the lower shell exactly the same. So yeah, if you want a different feel, you want a little bit more forgiveness off the top, take the top screw out.
So should I put it back in?
Sounds like it.
It's doing nothing, basically. You may feel like it is, but that's what we call a placebo effect. Power plate's a little different. So power plate, technically, yes, you are adding material to the cuff. So you are making the cuff a little bit stiffer. So technically, if there's a power plate in there, yes, that boot is a little bit stiffer. But more so, the reason to have a power plate in there is to change basically the engagement of the cuff. If the power plate is higher, when you lean forward, the shin is going to hit that power plate sooner. So you'll get a faster engagement of the flex.
Yeah.
If the power plate is lower and it's the same height as the actual layer of the cuff, then all you're actually doing there is doubling up, not doubling, but increasing the thickness of the cuff. So if you have it on the lowest, it will just make the boot a little stiffer. If you have it on its highest, it'll make the boot a little stiffer, but a little bit faster to engage as well.
Yeah, that's kind of what I felt from it, the engagement.
Yeah, I'm going to try to go back to it at some point, but for kind of simplicity's sake, I just couldn't get my foot in. It was that with the cable, I just couldn't get it open enough to get my foot in.
So I'm gonna swap what I've done here, and then try it again, and see. Yeah, because I'm interested to feel that, like you were saying, a little bit more movement in the upper cuff. I don't know that I'll like that, but fascinating. And now I want to like go back and just
Redo all your boots.
complain to anybody who's ever told me that removing a lower bolt will do anything.
There may be some shells where it does do something. I can say for certain on ours it won't.
Okay. That makes more sense, because I feel like I heard it like direct from like Lang or something at some point, like written down in an owner's manual.
Some boots may, but yeah.
That makes me feel a little better and less crazy.
So kind of a follow-up question on that. We haven't talked about the other Corteces at this point, but by removing the power plate, did I make a Cortex 130? Or is there a difference between this and the 130?
Yeah. So you didn't make a 130. There is a difference between it. So the 140 uses the stiffest lower shell. So the lowest shell on the 140, we only use it on that model. It's the stiffest. The cuff is shared between the 130, the 140, the 130, and the 125 women's boot. So even with a power plate, like if you put a power plate in a 130, it still won't be the same stiffness as a 140 with a power plate.
Okay.
Is there a way to gain more instep height in this boot? So we get a softer boot board, so you can't take that down. And then we have this fast fit instep, which I like, but it's still, like, for me, it's pretty low. Is there a way to make more instep height in this boot from a boot fitter's perspective?
Yeah, so actually, and you brought it up, but the boot board, it's a full width boot board as well. So a lot of race boots, they're very minimal inside and you end up standing on the shell. So those ones you can't grind it lower. These ones you can. We've got a hexagon pattern in the top. It's 2mm deep. That will give you a reference point for when you're grinding the boot board. So you've got a lot of material that you can remove from the lower, from the foot to lower the foot. But the instep will stretch as well. Boots, they are heat moldable in as much as they will give when you heat them up. Being a thicker shell, it's not going to stretch as much as something like a Recon or Anthem or a Mindbender, which is much thinner, but you will be able to get some adaptation out of there. So padding the top of your instep, heating up the shell, you'll be able to get some space out of the instep.
And you don't think that lower BOA kind of counteracts that? I mean, obviously you can crank down on anything and deform the boot and crush your instep, but yeah, I don't know. I've never had total success making this form into what I want in any heat moldable boot, but lowering the boot board has certainly helped me. So other high instep people have a sense of hope.
Yeah, no, honestly, this is one of the biggest parts why BOA worked for me is I have an extremely high instep. So I'm a size 26 length with a 28.5 verging on 29 instep height. So our buckle boots, I just can't do up our instep buckle. Like, can't even get it close. The shell doesn't even connect in my size. Yeah. That was a huge part for me in BOA. I tried the original prototype on. I was like, man, I can actually do up an instep finally and get the feel I want. but I still need to do an instep stretch on them. So I just do a heat mold on all of mine just to give it some space. But I'm finding more and more with BOA, I just don't need to do it as in the same way that I do a buckle boot. But yeah, you will still be able to get some space out of it.
Awesome.
What else you got, Bob?
We haven't talked about the liner yet. The liner is on the minimalist side. You know, you got your full lace up capabilities. Pretty thin material until you get to the heel and ankle pocket, at which point it starts to become more robust. You know, can you kind of talk about how that liner goes with this boot? And you know, Jeff and I have been spending time in zip fit liners, and really we're spoiled now, especially in the forefoot area where it's nice and comfortable and loose. And you, like, I've kind of learned that you don't need your forefoot cramped down. You know, is there any hope for normal boot manufacturers like yourselves to kind of take that material away from the forefoot and loosen up that area, especially when you're dealing with nice stiff foam that really holds your ankle and heel down?
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of good questions there. So,
Sorry.
no, it's great. So I will say straight away, you guys can help in terms of this education of what is needed in the forefoot. I agree with you. Like, you don't necessarily, as long as you've got a good shell fit, you don't need a liner with thick material to hold the foot still inside it because you're using the shell. However, we, as a brand, any boot brand, we have to understand that obviously the out of the box fit can be a big deciding factor. And especially on a boot bench, if a boot feels a little bit more snug because it's got a little bit more foam in it, that can be a big factor for a lot of people, especially if they're not too understanding of actually how a boot should fit. High-end skiers buying a 140 like this, yeah, they've tried a zip fit potentially. They know what they're looking for. But as you get down to the lower levels, if we build a really thin liner, then the boot that they maybe try from a competitor that's got a little bit more foam in there is usually, unfortunately, going to win. So there's a little bit of kind of education there, but also understanding the model line. So yeah, what you said about this liner is we wanted to keep it fairly minimalist. Again, coming back to those benchmarks we looked at, those consumer level race boots, most of those really don't have any foam particularly in it. It's really dependent on the shell to fit. Us being somewhere in the middle, we wanted to kind of do the best of both in a way. So we wanted to keep the forefoot, the instep tongue fairly minimal, but then give some heel padding in the back because that's going to be expected again by a lot of these consumers. So we tried to build the best of both. If you guys get a chance to try on the 110, or if you got somebody trying on the women's 95, that liner was actually designed to have more foam inside it to give more of a kind of a cushier fit. So we do try and build the liners to match the model line as well. So generally speaking, the stiffest flexes, we'll try and get a bit more minimal, keep the material where it's needed for performance. And then as you step down the line, there where we'll get more of the out of the box comfort, a little bit more kind of cushy fit inside. But liners for us is our kind of shell on Cortex was kind of the big thing. We wanted to get that performance out of it. We wanted to increase our liner performance, but moving forward, we understand we need to improve our liners even further. So the other model lines, we've got more boots coming out that are utilizing the kind of the Cortex feature set, and you'll see liner improvements in those as well. So we're doing a lot of work on liners right now.
Well, it was really easy to heat mold, and it made a big difference for both of us.
Yeah. It's a nice liner too.
Yeah, it was really tight in the Achilles out of the box, and then once you heated it up, like that made room.
Yeah, but good hold still.
Yeah, but I still need, I think, one more trip to the boot shop before I'm good. But for just a couple of stretches and heat molding the liner, for me to be in a low volume boot like this for however many hours we were out there this morning on day one, I thought was really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And I have very sensitive feet too, so.
Key part again is we don't want people necessarily having to spend 10 to 15 hours to make these boots comfortable. Whatever we can do to try and make them easier to fit out of the box while still having that performance is what we wanted to do. Like for a boot fitter, the easier boot is to fit and get out the door, the more you're going to sell. So it's good for a boot fitter. It's good for the end consumer as well, because they're getting a more comfortable boot with less work on the boot bench.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I think we can wrap this up. We'll say goodbye to our viewers here. Tom, you don't have to leave right away. We'll say goodbye to you after. But thank you so much. I mean, I at least learned that I did nothing by taking out that bolt, which was interesting. But it truly is interesting for me to hear from somebody like you, because like I can go out and ski it, or we can go out and ski them, and I can tell people the things that I feel. But again, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a part of the product development meetings. So it's just cool to hear the kind of the reasons why and the story of how it all came to be.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Welcome.
We'll follow this up with a full review. We've both, well, you've been skiing in them for one day. I've been skiing in them a little bit longer. So far, so good. I'm quite pleased. I mean, today was a weird day. We rained yesterday, and we had weird snow today, and I don't know. It would pretty easily could have felt not great, and
Yeah.
it felt awesome today.
Yep.
So, yeah, we'll follow up with a K2 Cortex 140 review. In the meantime, let us know if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Sweet.